Good morning, or depending on when you're listening to this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross and I was always told I had a voice for radio, so I've made a podcast all about the Pokémon trading card game. And you're listening to PTCG Radio on a very special week indeed. This is, for those of you that somehow didn't spot it on the title, my 100th podcast, which is either, you can look at it two ways. Maybe it's really, really impressive. I've been keeping this up for 100 weeks with just a couple weeks off when I'm on holiday and a couple weeks off over Christmas last year. Or you can look at it as, good God, this man has been doing a average 45-minute podcast about Pokemon for the last 100 weeks. I'm hoping you've gone for the former. Now, everybody's been expecting a really good podcast this week. Ever since I hit episode 90 about 2.5 months ago, I've been hearing, looking forward to episode 100, can't wait for the centennial, what are you going to do? And, I mean, what am I supposed to do? It's episode 100. It's the 100th episode I've done. So, what I'm going to do really should be the same thing I do every week. I'm going to tell you what's been going on in the world of Pokemon. But, of course, it's not every week. It's episode 100. So I'm going to do the very best I can to bring you the very best show that I can tonight. Or, of course, as I always say, if you're listening in the morning, then the very best show I can bring you this morning. We've got some moderately interesting news. I've got some questions from listeners I'm going to chuck your way. And I'm going to finish off with some interviews. Maybe it will be the longest podcast ever. Doesn't look like it's going to be the longest one ever, but we don't know. I've also got some updates on some of the podcast Pen Pals competition. I am waiting for the really not actually that impressive, but they're kind of cool if you think about it, prizes, which are not ready yet, hence why they haven't gone out. I have not forgotten about them. It will happen one day, I'm sure. So, starting off this week with the news, and as usually happens, as we're gearing up in the UK and the US for our new set, and over in Japan they are enjoying playing around with the set they've just got, they actually have an announcement of the next set, which they are going to be getting. And it seems to be following in the mould of the last few sets that we have had. It is called Phantom Gate. And it seems to be Psychic deck focused, in the same way that Furious/Rising Fist was fighting focused, and Flashfire was fire focused, and I suppose you could even say that XY was fairy focused and Plasma Blast was grass focused, if you really wanted to. And we don't know much about this set, but it's going to be released in Japan on September the 13th, which is, of course, less than a month after the release of Furious Fist in this country, which is kind of cool. It's going to focus on Psychic-type Pokemon. It's going to have Gengar EX and Mega Gengar EX as its mascots. And this shouldn't surprise you because, of course, in Furious/Rising Fist we had Lucario and Mega Lucario. And in Flashfire we had Charizard and Mega Charizard. Now, we're also going to be getting Dialga EX and Edgeslash EX. But they're going to come in a 60-card Hyper Metal Chain deck. And they're going to release deck boxes and sleeves with Mega Gengar EX, and this is going to be cool. Now, I have got, because everyone loves Gengar, and I've got high hopes for this. I've got really high hopes for Gengar, and the reason is, quite simply, Gengar cards tend to be cool. We had Gengar Prime a little while ago, which, if I remember, was the last Gengar card we got, although I could be mistaken about that. And, you know, he was pretty cool because he had the Lost Zone mechanic. And we had the Gengar that had the coin flip, whereby when you knocked him out, you had a coin flip, and if heads, you actually KO, or I think it's tails, your opponent, you know, his Pokemon died as well. And there was Gengar Level X, which I believe was kind of cool as well. So there has been a history of Gengar cards being cool. Certainly the Gengar Prime was very, very cool. So I'm hoping that this Gengar EX is going to be fairly cool. I can't obviously give you any details about it. It's not been leaked yet. Hopefully it will leak fairly soon. And what we've generally seen is that the kind of mascot Pokemon from a set do tend to get leaked just a little earlier than the rest of the set, so we might get lucky. Now, Gengar Level X, I've just pulled up a scan of this. If anyone's forgotten, it basically had a Poké Power, an old school ability, that said once during your turn you may choose one of your opponent's Pokemon Level X. Think of it like a Mega EX if you don't remember Level X's. Remove the Level Up card from that Pokemon and have your opponent shuffle that card into his or her deck. It's quite funky because obviously it reduced the HP and stuff, and it was quite cool. Now, the other Gengar I was referencing was Stormfront Gengar that had an ability Fainting Spell. Once during your opponent's turn, if Gengar will be knocked out by damage from an attack, you may flip a coin. If heads, the defending Pokemon is knocked out. It was a broken ability that I hated, but the point is, it was there nonetheless. So Gengars do have a history of being cool cards. Hopefully that will be the case again this time. Hopefully it won't be broken, and if they bring back Fainting Spell, I might quit the podcast and the game in a fit of uncontrollable rage. So, that's Gengar, that's the news. The only other news we've got is that Machamp is a pre-release promo, and this isn't terribly, surprising. It's a set based around fighting Pokemon, so they've given a cool little fighting Pokemon as the promo. As pre-release promos have been wont to do for a little while now, this has got alternate artwork which is exclusive to the UK, and obviously it's got the stamp on it as well. And pre-release promos are cool, they're nice to collect, so why not? And that, unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, is the news. But as I took you through the entirety of Furious Fist last week, I think you can probably forgive me. Speaking of which, there were a couple of omissions in last week's podcast. I do encourage you guys to get in touch with anything I miss. I don't think I'm infallible or anything silly like that. And I do ask people to get in touch with anything I've missed, and people do get in touch. And there were two things that I missed. Now, one of these I didn't miss, although, truth be told, I really should have brought this up. So, that was Hawlucha, not the EX, the regular Hawlucha. And Hawlucha, he's got the attack which does 60 damage for a fighting energy, but only to a non-EX. Its ability says don't apply weakness and resistance for this Pokemon's attacks. Resistance it's kind of cool because it goes through things like Evital's resistance, but crucially, it means that when you put a Silver Bangle on this, it will not one-hit KO a Thundurus or a Darkrai, because it doesn't take account of weakness and resistance. I didn't mention the EX thing last week because you're not really going to be attacking much other than an EX with this, but I should have mentioned his ability, so there we go. Of course, you could play this with Garbodor in order to shut off his ability to allow him to hit for weakness, but that's a lot of effort, and you're not going to get Garbodor out till turn 2 at the absolute earliest, and really Hawlucha is a kind of turn 1, because let's face it, you don't want to be sitting there with 70 HP in turns 3 or 4 trying to, get some damage on the board. That's just silly. Now the other one that I missed, and this was a miss from me, and I'm not entirely sure how I missed it, but as I've said, when I go through with a Japanese set, it's very much my first impressions, what I see when I first look at the cards, and then I look at it with hindsight and everybody else's ideas the second time around, going through stuff that I've missed. This was something I really should have seen. So I talked about the Den last week, and I talked about the fact that he's got Call for Family, search for 2 basic Pokemon, put them on your bench, and I said how that's not terribly important at the moment, because really, it's not the kind of thing we're using at the moment, but maybe it will be. Cards are generally in the format for at least 2 years, so maybe it's going to be good down the line. But he, of course, has a second attack, and this is actually much better. It reads like this. This attack does 20 damage times the number of energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon, and that's for 1 colourless energy. Now, let's assume everyone's playing Muscle Band instead of Bangle, because it's a little bit more versatile. I've pretty much stopped playing Bangle because Muscle Band is much better. Because even if you're playing a non-EX deck, you still can't use Bangle against another non-EX like Pyro. I just prefer the Muscle Band pretty much always. So it's one colourless energy, so it can be teched into any deck. Now it's got 70 HP and a weakness to fighting, so it's not going to stay around too long. But it's a basic, it attacks for 1 energy, you can drop this out of nowhere. Drop it like it's hot, if you will. So, let's say it does 20 times damage. So with an Evital, you essentially need to be doing 90 damage, because that's going to double. So if you put a muscle band onto Deden and the Evital's got free energy on, that's going to do 160. A laser without Verbank will get the KO there. If your opponent puts 4 energy on, then you're going to be doing 160, because that will do 80 times 2 for the weaknesses, 160. So you get the KO with either a muscle band or a laser. And if your opponent puts 5 energy on their Evital, it gets a 1-hit KO. It's not the best Evital counter ever, because it leaves it in your opponent's hands, and if they do things like, for instance, Y-Cyclone, and I've been saying, and this wasn't my idea, I got this from friends of mine, Jake Wolven for one, who will be on the podcast in a little bit. With Evital, unless you're getting 1-hit KO, Y-Cyclone is a better attack. So you put a dark and a double colourless, you Y-Cyclone, you move the double colourless to the bench, you've got 1 energy left. Deden's only doing 20, which doubles up to 40, or 40, which doubles up to 80, if you've got a muscle band on. And you're going to die straight away. So you're only 2-hit KOing Evital, if they've got 1 energy on. And that's actually only if you've got a muscle band. You're not 2-hit KOing it if you don't have a muscle band. And there are other, Raichu might be a stage 1 that needs 2 energy, but he's going to get the KO, it's in your hands. I like Deden if you're really struggling against Evital, but unfortunately, if your opponent just sits there Y-Cycloning and keeping 1 energy on Evital, then you are going to struggle a little bit to do any kind of substantial amount of damage and kill it. Decent Evital counter, not amazing. I don't like it as much as a lot of people, but maybe I will change my mind. So, special things I'm doing for the 100th episode include, first of all, there is a new 6 prizes article up, all about TDK, with some of my YouTube videos in to prove my point. Get yourself over to 6prizes.com. It's called Back on the Air, and I believe it's the 2nd article as we speak, or the 3rd article, or the 1st article, somewhere like that. It's near the top of the page anyway. So go and have a look at that. I think it's a good article. I've spent a bit of time doing it, so do enjoy that. And I actually have another 6 prizes article going up. Well, I say going up. I'm going to be submitting it in the next couple of days, and hopefully it will go up. And that is to answer the most common question I get asked recently, and that is, how do you beat Plasma with Pyro? So I thought, rather than just writing a couple of words, I would write a 1,500, 2,000 word article explaining it. And again, I'm backing up my article with some YouTube videos I've been making, so that rather than saying enter into war of attrition and try and deck them out, I can show you a video of Plasma against Pyro where the Plasma player tries to deck out the Pyro player. So hopefully you'll enjoy that. Speaking of my YouTube channel, please get over and have a look. Go to youtube.com/user/PTCG radio, or just search for PTCG radio on YouTube. You will find it. I've been getting a lot of subscribers recently, and I've been getting a lot of views, and it's going very, very well. But gosh darn it, ladies and gentlemen, I want some more. I want to grow this YouTube channel. I'm trying to get into posting a video a day. There have been some days when I've been posting multiple videos, but to try and keep a steady stream of content, I'm going to be making regular videos and trying to put one up every evening. Now, obviously, I'm not going to carry this on at all times, but my aim is going to be a video a day up there. So make sure you subscribe, watch my videos, like it. You know how YouTube works at this stage. You're all young, hip people, at least at heart. So please do get over there and have a look at that. If you guys keep watching it, I'll keep producing the content. If you don't, I know what I'm like. I'll get bored fairly quickly, like I did 9 months ago when I stopped doing YouTube, but I'm back. So, 6 prize articles, YouTube. I'm doing more this year. I'm getting more involved, more than just the podcast. So do please try and get over there and support it. I would really appreciate it. And hopefully you'll find something to enjoy over there. The other thing which I'm going to be doing is more interviews on the podcast. Now, these are going to be done on Skype, which is something I didn't want to do, but the necessity and the logistics of it have meant that I've had to. I'm going to answer a few questions from listeners, and then I'm going to explain all about the interviews to you. Stay tuned for them. I've got 3 coming up today, and you have my personal word that they are very good, interesting interviews. So, one question, and I'm afraid I haven't written down who asked these questions. I apologise. I haven't really got time to go back and look. So thank you to anyone who sent in questions. My apologies, I haven't got your names to hand. So one thing I was asked, what is my favourite deck? And I'm going to give you a rundown of the top 3 decks. I've been playing for a few years now. I've played multitudes of different decks in a few different formats. I'm not including Flareon because it's a little bit recent. I haven't got the perspective on Flareon, and I really lost heart in it when I couldn't play it for Nationals. So, at number 3, CMT, Celebi Mewtwo Tornadus. For those of you that don't remember this deck, there was Celebi Prime, which allowed you to attach a grass energy from your hand to one of your bench Pokemon, essentially giving you a second energy attachment per turn. You had Mewtwo, which has got X-Ball, which is still in the format, and Tornadus, which does... And I only played Tornadus EX, although a lot of people played non-EX Tornadus. And these are the ones which are still in the format. Go and have a look, you can still play with them today. And it also had Smeargle back in the day. Smeargle allowed you to... It had a Poker Power, what's now an ability, to look at your opponent's hand, choose a supporter you find there, and use it. So you would use switches and retreating and stuff, Sky Arrow Bridge, and, you know, in a good turn you would be able to use Smeargle a couple of times, and you'd use Celebi to attach an extra energy, and then you'd get your attacker up and rolling. It was a very fun deck, and after not playing it all year, I put it together, and I played it for the Grinder back in 2012, and I essentially made a list which won the mirror, and by focusing purely on Tornadus EX, because it does 60... and plus powers in the format back then. It did 60 for a double colourless, and we had Capture Without a Flip and Junk Arm, which was Dowser Machine as a trainer, so you had up to 8 Pokemon catchers without flips per game. It was crazy. And in the mirror, I just got Tornadus EX out and just captured all their Celebis and Smeargles, and I put Terrakion in and I made it beat Darkrai, which was the deck to beat. Went through, grinded into Worlds, didn't take it seriously, did terribly, etc. That's what makes it my number 3 deck. Sorry Mewtwo Regigigas, but coming third at the ECC hurts too much to put you in. My number 2 deck was a deck I played just once for one Battle Road, the old school equivalent of a League Challenge, and it was amazing. I can't remember if I've mentioned this one on the podcast before, but I played a just Kyurem deck. This is a Kyurem with Outrage and Glaciate, and also Kyurem EX, the first Kyurem EX, which does 60 damage and discards a special energy for free energy. And I played this with Experience Share, and I believe this was back before Tool Scrapper came out. So you would basically start putting water energy on your Kyurems, or DCE if you're running out of time. And then when they got knocked out, Experience Share would move into your other Kyurems, and you would Outrage and you would Glaciate to take down loads of Pokemon, and you had the EX there to hit hard, and it wasn't a great deck, but it was just fun. And in that particular tournament, it's the luckiest run of games I have ever had. Round 1, I'm playing against a person in their first ever tournament. Round 2, I'm playing against a Reshiram EX Typhlosion, I want to say, deck. A Mono Fire deck. Didn't take long. Round 3, I'm playing against a Mew Box deck, which basically, there was an old Pokemon Vileplume, which was full-on Trainer Lock from the bench as soon as you got your Pokemon active. Now, it was two-way Trainer Lock for you and your opponent, but it's on the bench, you're now Trainer Locked. And it would be played with Mew, and Mew would basically, you could put Pokemon in the Lost Zone and then copy their attacks. So Mew would poison them and drag up bench Pokemon and do things like that. But he had 60 HP, and Glaciate does 30 HP to all of your opponent's bench Pokemon. All their Pokemon, in fact. So essentially, if I can Glaciate twice, I'm going to win the game by knocking out all of his Mews, amongst other cards. And then in round 4, I played my good... That was Nick Pierce I played in that one. And then in round 4, I played my good friend Tommy Roberts with Miss Magius Terrakion, which was another basically auto win. Lost in round 5 to Jack Armstead, and then lost in top 4 to Tommy Roberts after drawing dead for 3 games in a row. The only supporter I saw all game was after Tommy end me. And by all game, I mean all 3 games. What can you do? But my number 1 favourite deck ever, and anyone that knows me fairly well will know there's only one choice. It's Donphan. I played this in Nationals back in 2011, and Donphan was basically Doug Trio. It had an attack for 1 energy, which did 60 damage and 30 to all your bench Pokemon. We had Expert Bout in the format then, which reduced damage done to you by 20, did 20 more damage for all of your attacks. I think it raised HP by 20, added 20 damage to all of your attacks, but meant you gave up 2 prize cards rather than 1. It basically turned him into Donphan EX. We also had back then Broken Time Space, which allowed you, it's a stadium, which allowed you to evolve the turn you put it down. And my deck was very focused on put down Phanpy, evolve to Donphan, 1 fighting energy, Expert Bout, boom. And you could get a turn 180 quite often. Now, at the time, the format was entirely dominated by SP decks, which involved Luxray, who was fighting weak, and Garchomp, and essentially all the Pokemon had about 80 HP, which was lovely for me, because I killed them all quite easily. Garchomp level X didn't, but you could take him down in 2 hits and you get 2 prizes. And I had some tricks in there. I played Regirock and Regice. Regirock, I believe, allowed you to discard 2 cards from your hand and attach an energy to your bench, which was quite handy. And there was Regice, which was basically making your opponent switch their active Pokemon, but like Escape Rope, not like Catcher, so they got to choose, by discarding 2 cards from your hand. It was wonderful for getting rid of one-off counters and such. And we had Spiritomb back in the format then, which was a basic whereby when you left it active, it blocked trainers for your opponent. So obviously Regice was able to get him out and use trainers. And back then we had cards like Uxie, a basic Pokemon that you put down and then you draw up to 7. And we had Pokédraw Plus, which if you played 1, you got to draw a card. If you played 2 at a time, I believe you got to search for any 1 or maybe 2 cards. It was fast and consistent as you like. It set up pretty much every game. It had an almost auto into SPs which were flooding the format. And I even managed to get it to beat Gengar about 50% of the time. Made it to top 16 of Nationals and lost to Gengar, but certainly not the end of the world. It was a very fun deck and I loved it, because back then everyone played SP like people play Yveltal, but SP, a lot of people say there was a little bit more skill involved. What that meant was that when you weren't playing a brilliant SP player, you could know exactly what they were going to do, so you could tech for it. And one thing that won me my favourite game I've ever played against my friend Tom Hall at Nationals that year was every single person, when you play SP, they would put up Crobat, because Crobat it had a fighting resistance and it had 80 HP, so even with an Expert Bout you wouldn't get the KO. But there was Ruins of Alph, which is like the Magnetic Stadium that's just been released, which took away resistance. And long story short, when I was playing Tom, I played my one... I did play my one Crobat G, which had a Poker Power that did 10 damage to one of your opponent. I then, because he got a Honchkrow out, which could one-hit KO a Expert Belted Donphan for 2 prizes, but it had 90 HP. So I was able to play a Crobat G to do the 10 damage. I was then able to get a Donphan out with an energy and an Expert Bout, and then drop Ruins of Alph to do that 90 damage. Now, to be fair to Tom, the game did still come down to a coin flip, but that's not the point. My favourite game ever, with my favourite deck ever. They were my favourite decks I've ever played. Hopefully, I will find some more decks in the future I enjoy playing just as much. Now, another question I got asked is basically which card do I most want to bring back into the format? And this is actually a very easy question for me. It's Uxie. Now, Uxie's a card I mentioned a little while ago. It had a Poker Power, which would be an ability nowadays. And essentially, you put Uxie down and you draw up to 7. So you empty out your hand, and with Ultra Ball this would combo brilliantly, because you'd be able to empty your hand using Ultra Ball to search for the Uxie. You put it down, you draw up to 7. Now, we also, a while ago, and we had this at the same time as Uxie, but it got rotated out first, we had Claydol, which was a stage 1 with a power, which allowed you to put up to 2 cards to the bottom of your deck, that was 1 or 2 from your hand, and then draw until you've got 6 in hand. Imagine that, ladies and gentlemen. You've got a stage 1 on your bench, which allows you to get 1 or 2 dead cards from your hand back into your deck, and then draw till you've got 6, and you can have multiple ones of them out. Then you've got this basic, which allows you to bench it and draw up to 7. People didn't really need to play draw supporters. I mean, people would play supporters like Roseanne's Research, which allowed you to search for 2 in any combination, I think, of basic energy and basic Pokemon. It was wonderful, because decks just set up back then. We had Trainer Draw with things like Pokédraw Plus, we had Uxie and Claydol, and decks just ran. There was none of this random supporter malarkey we've got running around at the moment. So, that is a card I miss most, because if we could bring Uxie back into the format, it would make every deck instantly more consistent. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with making every deck instantly more consistent. What that means is you can tech out your decks a little bit more because you're more likely to draw your techs, and it means that if everybody's setting up, you're taking away that luck of, oh, am I going to set up, am I not, and you're replacing it with, I know I'm going to set up unless I get exceedingly unlucky. Let's make a deck that's going to win when I set up. That would be lovely. Now, the last question I'm going to answer today, and this is less of a sexy question than the last two, if indeed you could call the last two sexy. And I've been asked this by several people recently, and they've been asking, how do I record the podcast and the YouTube videos? So I'm going to explain this very quickly, and if you have no interest in this, bear with me, I won't be long. There is a free program on the internet called Audacity, and I'm not plugging these people, I'm not paid by these people, I'm literally just telling you what I use. So if you want to do some recording yourself, this would be genuinely what I think you should use. And Audacity, spelt Audacity, is a free program which allows you to record and edit audio. Now, I don't know how extensive the editing tools are. I don't need extensive editing tools. I do all of my sound recording on Audacity for the YouTube and for the podcast because it comes out nice and clear. And I've got a headset which is moderately good, moderately expensive, which gives me half decent sound quality. And that's where all of my audio comes from. Now, my video, I use a paid program, not a free program, called Camtasia, Camtasia. Now, because I work in a school, one of the brilliant bonuses of working in a school is that they've generally got all this kind of software with licenses, which makes it perfectly legal for them to stick it on my home laptop and on my work laptop, as long as I occasionally use it for work, which, for the record, I do. And Camtasia basically records what's on the screen, or you can, edit it down so you only record a little bit of the screen. So when I'm recording my YouTube videos, which are generally off PTCGO at the moment, all I do is just literally record that, and I now record every game I play on PTCGO. If it's a rubbish game, I stop the recording halfway through and delete the file. If it's a good game, then I'll save it with a name which will remind me. And then every couple of days, I'll go and I'll pick a couple of games, if there's a couple I like, and I'll generally record the commentary. And now I'm trying to build up a little list of this is going up this day, this is going up the next. So I keep a little kind of log, and I have got some games. I've got a lovely TDK game where I played against an Aggron Mill deck. It's not the most, it's a quite exciting game, but it's not really the kind of deck people want to see very much. So that's one of my reserves, and if before the format changes too much, I want to stick up an extra video and I've got nothing in reserve, that will go up. What I do, and I still record on Audacity because I find Audacity easier to use and giving better sound quality. And then when I record on Audacity, I'll just save the file as an MP3. I will then copy and paste that into Camtasia Studio, which is a studio which goes along with the recording equipment. And I'll literally just post the video, post the file, and post the audio file, and off we go. I do generally, and where it's an exception I say it very clearly, but I generally record the audio later because I'm not going to live narrate every game of PTCGO I ever play. I'll stop playing PTCGO. So I make sure I've got some good games recorded, and then I'll go and narrate onto the recordings that I've made, making sure that it's going to be something which people are going to want to use, want to view, and videos I want to put up online. In terms of the podcast on YouTube, it's very simple. I've got a static picture, and every week I go into Paint and change what the number and the title of the episode. And then, for some reason, Camtasia doesn't like that, so I go into Windows Movie Maker, and I just stick in the image, stick in the audio, and make the image fit the audio, and boom. That's how it works. If anyone would like more detail about how I did a recording of the podcast or the YouTube videos, please do get in touch, and I will see what I can do in terms of helping you out. But in a nutshell, that's how I do it. So, if you have any more questions, as always, you know how to get in touch. Tweet me at TheWassy. Email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk. Or, if you're listening to this on YouTube, because from now on, gosh darn it, every one of my podcasts is going to go up on YouTube. It is going to happen. Or WordPress or SoundCloud or anything like that, just stick a comment down below. I don't check all of them all the time, but I do periodically check WordPress, SoundCloud, my YouTube videos, email, Twitter, etc. Although Twitter I do check daily because it's Twitter. So if you want to ask me a question, sooner or later I will get it and I will get back to you. Now, before we get on to the interviews, podcast pen pals. These are people that I called it send me something, and that sounded a little bit grabby. So I changed it to Podcast Pen Pals, which has got alliteration, which makes it better. Speaking of which, my next Expired article about Pyro, check the alliteration I'm getting in the title, ladies and gentlemen. It's beautiful. So, there are 3 that I want to point out. These are not the only 3 good ones. I need to go through and have a check through and see which other ones. There was one chap who sent me a signed Sizor Prime, which was really cool, and a lovely letter that I've put in a drawer, which I can't get to right now. But the lovely Hot Dog Hat, man who regularly tweets and comments on my YouTube videos, which I appreciate. Thank you, sir. Nice to have the support. He sent me a Christmas card, which firstly was lovely. I love getting Christmas cards. Secondly, it was nowhere near Christmas when he sent it, which somehow made it more fun and more charming than if it actually was at Christmas, which was absolutely fantastic. So thank you for that, sir. Another friend of the show who tweets quite often and gets in touch, Daniel Irvin, painted a mama swine onto a flat canvas and emailed it to me from America, and it's beautiful and it's literally on the wall of my flat as we speak. Spending the time to actually paint me a picture of my favourite Pokemon is utterly, utterly wonderful. And the other chap I want to shout out is Michael Cornwall, who does listen with his daughter Addison, and there is a new addition to the family. So firstly, congratulations, sir, and secondly, I do wonder if you're putting your second child through what your first child went through. Although, as a side note, if I haven't told you this yet, the very first time I met Addison, it was wonderful, because I bumped into Martin at a tournament, we started chatting away, and she just turned and looked at me, eyes wide open in amazement, because she'd heard 40, 50 episodes of my podcast, and it was the podcast man, but in real life. That was just a beautiful, beautiful moment. Martin Cornwall, his entire family sent me a signed card each, and that was wonderful. And actually, Martin is such a lovely chap. He has taken pity on me with my new YouTube endeavour and my claims to bear with me, I don't have all the cards I need, and is sending me a boatload of unused PTCGO cards in order to bolster my collection so that I can bring you guys more videos. So thank you to Martin for that. He's a lovely chap, and sooner or later, the 3 of you at least shall be getting some presents from me. Thank you to everyone who sent letters. I am going to be sending out replies to all of them. I haven't forgotten. These things take time. Do not worry, ladies and gentlemen. It is happening. So, to finish off the podcast today, I'm going to show you some interviews. The first interview I'm going to share with you is from my lovely friend Luke. Now, you may remember Luke Kirkham. He is a chap who made top 16 at UK Nationals with Big Basics, but he's also the chap which started up his Victory Road blog. And do go find this blog, ladies and gentlemen. Let's put it this way. This is not the first UK Pokemon blog that I could have told you about and plugged to you. This is the first UK Pokemon blog I have plugged to you. I love you guys. Oh, that sounds a little bit lame, doesn't it? But never mind. I appreciate all of you guys listening to the podcast, and I don't want to waste your time with rubbish. Victory Road is a good blog, and here is a lovely little interview I did with Luke Kirkham just the other day. Alright, I'm here with Luke Kirkham, who has the dubious honour of being my very first Skype interview, which I said I'd never do, but you have to change the rules sometimes. You may remember him as the chap who got top 16 at UK Nationals with Big Basics, or from his Victory Road blog, which I've been plugging a little bit on the podcast recently, but in my defence, it's genuinely a good blog. Good evening, Luke.
Good evening. How you doing?
Very well, sir. Yourself?
Not too bad, not too bad.
Excellent. So I've got a few questions here which I think people might be interested in. You never know. First things first, always interesting. Take us through the kind of genesis. How did you get into Pokemon?
Well, when I was younger, sort of around base set, jungle, fossil time, when the cards came out, I was a collector at school, as was everyone at my age, because I am quite old, I must admit. And I just sort of collected. My neighbour at the time was a little bit older, but he actually played the card game competitively, not on a big scale, but just sort of friendly matches here and there. So I started to build a few decks and play a few games against him. But then as I got older, my priorities changed and it sort of disappeared from my knowledge. Then about a year and a half ago, my little brother Corey was still collecting Pokemon cards. And I came across some of his cards, had a look through, and it brought a bit of nostalgia back to me. So I looked into it and I said I used to battle when I was younger. And I had basically just a bit of nonchalant research online, and I came across PTCGO. And from there, PTCG, doing a bit more research and making some basic decks, I actually stumbled across Sutton Coldfield Pokemon website, Sutton Coldfield League, should I say. And about 2 weeks later, I built some decks for me and Corey. 2 weeks later, we went to our first league session, and then the week after, our first tournament, which was Sutton Coldfield City Championships, which I narrowly missed out on by one place, I believe, in making top cut, which was frustrating, and it took me another year to get top cut, but hey ho.
That's a lot better than my first tournament. So how long have you actually been playing competitively?
A year and a half.
And in that time, I'm assuming you played a few different decks. What's the best deck? What's your favourite deck or format that you've been playing in so far?
Well, I started playing just as Boundaries Cross came out, so every format I've been in sort of was Boundaries Cross onwards. I prefer the formats this season with first term rules. Although I did play quite a lot of big basics decks with success last year, I think with the first term rules and things like Eels being quite popular and Landorus destroying them, I feel this season's format is definitely better. My favourite deck, I think, because I've sort of pretty much started with it and carried on with it, has been Big Basics. It's a deck I use at Nationals, which I only missed out on Cup with, and it's just such a good deck at the minute. It's completely off the radar, and it surprises me because I believe that other than one matchup which it struggles with, it's got a good all-round matchup.
Tell me about that, because I know you've been championing Big Basics, and I was historically a guy who really championed Big Basics. I basically gave up on it, pun intended, and you've kind of kept it going, and you showed at Nationals. I believe you drew your final game when a win would get you into cut, if I remember correctly.
Yes, that's
somewhat
correct, yes.
Frustratingly, to Scott Burgess, the winner, who will hopefully be on the podcast next week or the week after. Why Big Basics? What convinced you to take it to Nationals, given that, like you say, it was completely off of everybody else's radar?
Well, I've been testing a little bit with it leading up to Nationals. I won a league challenge. I won 2 league challenges with it, and thought this was actually quite a competitive deck. I only played it in the first league challenge as a bit of fun, something different, and I won that league challenge. And I thought this has actually got some miles to it, because I beat a good Yvettal list and a good Plasma list on the day. From players who both already qualified for Worlds. So I thought it's got some miles to it. And my thinking with Nationals, I did a lot of testing with my good friend Tamal, who I spent a lot of time with leading up to Nationals, and discussing with it and thinking it through. I wanted to build a deck that didn't mind going second, that could still keep up the pressure if there was a supporter drought, and that hits big, hits quick, and all its attackers only use 1 energy, or can attack for 1 energy. And basically, you have Garbodor in there to slow the decks down, and with Druddigan as well, it takes a bit of fear out of the Blastoise matchup and the Raybor matchup.
Sounds like a plan. Now, you were very hard done by, because you narrowly missed out on top 8 at Nationals, and I know you made top 16, something which I've been kind of disappointed by and not made a secret of that, is the fact that we had 150-something Masters whittled down to a top 8 at Nationals. Given quite, and you said yourself, you've won a couple of league challenges with a deck. Given quite how well you've done this season, with less played decks, not going to as many tournaments as you could have done, is next season one where we're going to be seeing you challenging for a Worlds invite, or are we going to still be a little bit more casual?
I think towards the end of the year, as most people know in the UK, for most of the season I played rogue decks at every event going and every tournament I possibly could. The biggest deck that I used to some success was a Scizor based deck, which I top cut cities with, top cut the winner box with, and then narrowly missed out on a few regionals with it. But I think going into next season, I've been given that sort of, after a good run at Nationals, I got a bit more of that competitive edge to me, and I think next season I'm definitely going for the invite. I mean, I'm pleased for my first full season to get sort of around 250 championship points, which is not bad considering I played road decks most of the season. But the frustrating thing is it makes me wonder what if I would have perhaps played it a bit more serious.
It's the argument I have with myself every single year. So, I'm currently telling myself I'm going to play good decks all of next year, but I've tried that 3 years in a row and it never works. So tell me about this blog, Victory Road. If I remember correctly, it started up fairly recently. Tell me about the blog. Tell me, why you started it. What makes you think people will be going there rather than... Because we have a lot of content around at the moment. What's special?
Originally, I had the idea for the blog around 6 months ago. But at the time, I wanted to have some sort of authority with what I say, in the fact that I could put a blog out and people want to read it, knowing that I'm a good player and that I can sort of be respected for my opinions. Whereas 6 months ago, I was still relatively new. I hadn't won anything. I hadn't done anything major, so I didn't think I perhaps had the credence to put a blog out there that people would want to read. But as I've done better and better as the season's gone on, I've got a bit more recognition for myself and my play, so I know that people perhaps respect what I say. One thing as well, there was, in the UK, there wasn't anything really blog-wise in the UK. I was quite a big reader of Colin Mole's Celadon City Gym blog, and I spoke to Colin quite a lot about it and the idea of running one myself, because I think it was a gap in the UK that we didn't have, and the response I've had from it has been fantastic. The amount of support and people wanting to write articles for me has been brilliant, and the amount of views we've had over the last couple of weeks has been really good. So I'm really pleased with how it's took off and the way it's gone, and hopefully it'll continue to go in that respect.
Sounds like a plan. I am aware of a couple of blogs that have propped up in the UK in the last couple of years, none of which I have been pushing on my podcast for a very good reason. They've not been particularly good. I know you've also recruited Tamal Cameron, who may be on this episode if I can grab him later tonight. And he's been talking about the Japanese scene a little bit, because he's got a bit of insight in that, which a lot of people aren't able to offer, which is fantastic.
Yeah, definitely. And with Tamal, we've got someone there who, again, I spend a lot of time with Tamal and go through a lot of ideas, but it's someone there who has been there, seen it, got the t-shirt. He top cut Worlds, top 4 at the ECC last year. So it's someone as well who knows his way around the game. And the good thing with Tamal, he goes to Japan quite regularly with family links, so he can go to Japan and bring back an insight onto the meta game in Japan, which a lot of people like to hear about and like to know about, because it is quite a niche here in the UK and most Western countries, that we don't know as much about the Japan meta game as perhaps others.
Indeed, and that gives you something that a lot of blogs can't offer, even the big American ones.
Definitely.
Superb. Well, thank you very much for your time. Love to hear about the blog and all of that. Good luck for next season and with the blog.
Thank you very much.
So, thank you very much to Luke Kirkham for being kind enough to give us that interview, and I really do suggest you go and check out his blog, Victory Road. I think it's victory-road.co, because it really is a good one to check out. It's one that I do frequent, and quite frankly, I read everything that goes up there. It's good stuff. Now, if anybody's wondering, yes, right back at the beginning I did say I would be doing no Skype interviews. Here is the reasons for changing my mind. Firstly, logistically, I couldn't get round to interview all of these people. And secondly, at a tournament, I'll generally get a 3 to 5 minute interview at the end of a tournament when they're tired and there's people running around shouting. Whereas here, a lot of these interviews, you're talking about 7 to 10 minutes, these interviews, and it allows me to go into a bit of detail, ask them about when they started playing. If you've got any questions you want me to ask people, by the way, tweet me at the Wossy, email me ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk. I'll see what I can do. But it allows me to delve a little bit deeper, and I like that. Now, These next two interviews, and I'm just going to put them one after another, and that's pretty much going to be the end of the podcast. Although I'll do a little outro at the end. It'd be rude if I didn't say goodbye on the 100th episode. But what I'm going to start doing is a little bit of a project between now and Worlds, and I'm going to basically be interviewing and bringing you interviews with the UK Worlds competitors. Now, one thing I want to know from you guys, do you want to hear from seniors? I've had, I think, 3 UK seniors who have their Worlds invites, and they have volunteered their services, and I've had other people saying, no one cares about seniors. But I get questions from seniors about seniors, so, and this is really important, if anybody wants to hear from seniors, you have to get in touch with me. And if you do, I'll see if I can get them on. But in terms of the Masters, there's going to be some people that I'm less close with, that I don't talk to so often, that it's going to be difficult for me to get on the podcast. I'll try my best. For everybody else, it's nice and simple. We're going to get as many on as we can. Firstly, this will give you an insight into how people qualify for Worlds, and, their philosophies behind it and all that, what they think about Worlds, etc. But also it'll allow you to learn a little bit about each of the UK Worlds competitors, so hopefully when Worlds comes, if you're following it along on the day or you're looking at the results afterwards, you can kind of put a voice and a little bit of personality to the name you see, so that we get a bit more rooting for the UK players going along. So today you're going to hear from Jake Wolven and Mal Cameron about how they started playing Pokemon, how they qualified for Worlds this year, etc. And they've got some really interesting insights to share. Obviously, I've heard these because I've already done them, and I was there when they did them. But over the next few weeks, we're going to be hearing from people like Charlie Powell, Alex Dow, Sam McClúey, UK Nationals champion Scott Burgess, Luke Burke, etc. A number of people have already volunteered to help me out on the podcast, and that's without me really trying. So I will get a list of all the UK Worlds competitors, and I will get as many as I can in the podcast to share their insights with you. So what you're going to hear now is an interview with Jake Wolven, and then you're going to hear an interview with Mal Cameron, both lovely UK players who have got their Worlds invite for this coming season already, and then I shall meet you on the other side of these. Okay, so I'm here with Jake, or if you prefer, Jake Wolven, for the first of my series where I profile the UK Worlds competitors this year, so that when you see the random list of names, you know who we're talking about. Say hello, Jake.
Hello.
So Jake has been on the podcast a couple times before. He's no stranger to doing well in the UK. But let's take it right back to the beginning, Jake. Tell us how you got going in this whole Pokemon malarkey.
How I got going at all was a friend of mine, I think he saw one of those blister packs with the Unleashed Blastoise.
I remember.
Saw it in a game shop or something, and then he showed me it, and I was like, okay, well, I have to get back into this now. Just because of that one card. I don't even think it was that good, but I saw it and thought, alright, we need to make decks and play against each other. We ended up buying a bunch of cards, and we ended up making the same deck against each other, which was using that Blastoise.
Sounds constructive.
Yeah, and I think maybe Floatzel or something. Oh no, for Alligator. Something not amazing, put it that way. We just we put stuff together. I found out about PTCGO and play TCG, and I think I began actually playing online around when Noble Victories came out.
That sounds about right.
And then I ended up picking up a few Mewtwo's when Next Destinies came out, and thought I'd head to a tournament and see how I do.
And how did you do at the first tournament?
3-3.
I went 1-4, so that's pretty good going.
That's not bad. To be fair, two of my opponents were Jack Armstead and Charles Barton.
Oh, that's not a nice introduction.
And one of the other opponents was Durant, so...
Yeah, I remember at my first tournament, there was stories about, oh my god, this guy's got a really good Kabutops deck. And at the time, I was like, oh man, I don't want to play that. In hindsight, I have literally no idea what that could have been. There's never been a good Kabutops deck.
Fair enough.
But I do remember the Blastoise you were talking about, because they had that as the Unleashed promo card, and I picked up 4 copies because I was convinced it was going to be good.
Yeah, it had in the blister pack thing, it had the Shard Hollow, whatever you call it.
Yes.
And so I thought, well, that looks cool, I have to get it.
Yeah.
I think it came with Call of Legends packs.
Oh, that's a waste of money.
Yeah.
So you've been playing for a couple of years, is that about right?
Yeah, the first tournament was March 2012.
Nicely remembered. So in that time, and you haven't seen a lot of different formats, what's your favourite deck? What have you enjoyed playing more than any other?
Probably, weirdly enough, though I shouldn't, everyone likes to complain about the format, as do I. I actually really like the deck I tried at Nationals, which was Aromatisse it's Plasmatisse, but there are actually a lot of non-plasma basics.
Yes, Plasma Aromatisse, as I've been calling it, using Thunderous to get the energy on rather than Xerneas and Fairy energy.
Yeah. And then, multiple attackers, Varisian, Landorus, that sort of thing.
And is it just the options you get in that deck, or is there something else?
Well, I played, older decks back in, the SP era kind of decks. And at Nationals, in fact, I played a mirror match. It was more or less 2 cards difference between my deck. And it felt like I was playing the SP mirror match.
How so?
Well, you had, the options of capturing something up via an ability. You had the total kind of healing aspect of it. You had the variety of attackers and the ease of moving the energy around. That's probably why it felt a bit like that.
Fair enough, it sounds good. I mean, I remember the SP format nicely because I just remember Donphan, and everyone played SP, and Donphan was not nice for SP decks.
No.
Everyone tended to get Machamp.
You could one-hit the Luxray.
Yeah, it was amazing. So, you have qualified for Worlds this year, hence why you're in the Worlds qualification thing. Take us through your journey this year to kind of outline how you ended up getting your invite.
It was actually kind of decent placements at a lot of tournaments. I think I got my, I got top 32 at Worlds, so that gave me 60. Then I came second, top 8, and 2 top 16s at regionals, so not any wins or anything. And then at cities I placed, I think, 2 first places, a top 4 and a top 8 or something like that, and that gave me all the points.
So you have won some tournaments this year?
Yeah, there's the 2 cities.
I was having an interesting conversation with people the other day, and we realised that between us, we'd won 4 tournaments in about 5 years. And this was good players like George Boone and Dan Middleton.
Oh, okay.
Just top cuts and no further.
Yeah, that kind of happens, I guess.
To be fair, my resume of wins is 2 Battle Roads, 1 Fake Cities, and the Grinder, which just doesn't really seem to work.
That's pretty good. I've never won a Battle Road.
Really?
Yeah. Best I've done is come second.
Well, I'm not ruining it in this conversation, but I'm going to mention on the podcast about the best tournament ever.
Good. But yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing it.
You're going to have to wait for that. So, that was your trip into Worlds. In terms of Worlds and going forward to format, now you said you came top 32 at Worlds last year. So let's hear about that quickly. Tell us what you played last year at Worlds, how it went, and...
I played kind of very standard Plasma Kyurem deck. No Lugia, nothing like that. I think I had 1 Absol as an alternate attacker. I had played and tested the mirror quite a lot, and I ended up playing 5 of my Swiss rounds as the mirror. And I won all of those, which is pretty much why I got the record I did.
That'll get you. Because you cut quite high, did you not?
I actually cut in 7th, if I remember correctly.
That's pretty good going.
So, if they had made the top 8 1 year early... Unfortunately, of course, Jason Klaczynski cut in 26th, I think. So I had to play him and I lost.
Yeah, that's bad.
Yeah.
But there's no shame going out to the eventual winner. Were those games close? I mean, obviously you got a good look at his deck. Was it?
Well, he did run 2 Enhanced Hammer, which actually it did hurt quite a bit. The first game, they were never close enough. I think the second game was a bit closer, but I whiffed something for 2 turns, and then I couldn't keep up.
That's absolutely fair. So we got top 32 at Worlds last year, which was your first World. You got your second one coming up this year. Now, I mean, you have correctly pointed out, it is going to a top 8. All the tournaments this year are a top 8, which is quite controversial as far as I'm concerned. I mean, given that you came 7th last year, do we think top 8 at Worlds this year is a realistic goal?
Well, I'll try. That's as much as I can say. I'm not sure how realistic it is, especially with, I think because they've made the championship points higher, the field will probably be a bit tougher as well.
I agree with that. So the final 2 questions. First of all, what's the play for Worlds?
Well, the play for anything, I think, right now is a Veltal Garb. If you're stuck with a play, just play that deck and you'll be fine.
If you don't mind a ridiculous amount of mirror.
Yeah, but if you playtest the mirror, which if you ever play online, you'll end up coming against it at some point, then, I'm sure you'll do fine.
And to be fair, that worked for you quite well last year. And finally, Are there any plans to slow down or stop in the near future? Are you going to be grinding, trying to get the Worlds invite every year, or is there going to be a slowdown in the near future?
Potentially a slowdown next year. I'll probably see how this Worlds goes in order to decide it.
And can we ask why? Grown-up stuff, or?
Well, I guess I've just got a lot of work to do, which I've normally sidelined for other things. When really I should sideline those other things for the work I have to do.
Yeah, you're speaking to the guy that spends his evenings making YouTube videos and sorting out podcasts.
Yeah, instead of preparing lessons, right?
Oh, I don't prepare lessons anymore. Anyway. Exactly. Thank you very much for your time. Of course, very good luck at Worlds, and we hope to see you with another top cut at Worlds, preferably not playing against a already two-time world champion.
Thanks.
Alright, so I'm here with Tamal Cameron, no stranger to the podcast, not his first appearance, but in my ongoing quest to catalogue all of the UK Worlds Qualifiers, we welcome him again. Hello, Tamal.
Hey, thanks for having me again.
Now, I know we've asked this question before, about 50 podcasts ago, but it was a while back, so just take us briefly through, how did you actually get into the game?
Okay, basically, I came from a competitive scene for the Super Smash Bros. Game, which is actually getting really popular at the moment, which is good to see. And I had a couple of friends in there, including George Boone, who's pretty well known in UK at least. And one day they were just like, "We're gonna play Pokemon, why not?" And I had my base set deck, and I thought I'd get into it, and I got absolutely destroyed. So I actually bought some recent cards, and I was pretty much hooked ever since. That was about 3-4 seasons ago now, when Undaunted first came out. So it's been a while.
It seems to have been about the time of the explosion. I mean, speaking to Luke the other day, is very much the same kind of thing. And if I remember correctly, unlike a lot of people, you had fairly quick success in the game. You didn't have to wait too long before you were pulling in some good results.
No, it's pretty weird. I thought the game was easy to begin with, because I think the very first cities I went to, I won that. And the very first regionals I went to, I won that as well. And I was just like, I could really get into this game. This seems alright. And I've had a few reality checks since, but I've enjoyed it ever since.
So you say you've been playing pretty much since Undaunted, about 4 seasons. Have you had a favourite deck in that time? Something that you kind of missed, or that you're enjoying playing now more than anything else?
It's quite sad, but it's a deck that I've never actually played in tournament. But Dialgachomp. Whenever I get the chance to play old format, I will 100% play Dialgachomp, because I feel so comfortable in it, and I really regret not playing it. Although I did well in that opening season, having not played Dialgachomp, so I can't regret it too much. But it's probably the most fun deck, one of the most skill-intensive decks to play at the same time as well. That's what I enjoy more than anything.
I have a similar regret, and I always meant to play it, but I just couldn't put down Donphan that season.
I don't blame you.
Feel your pain. What about the format nowadays? Do you think it's better than before? Does it compare favourably?
It depends how far. It's not great. It's obvious it's not great. The supporters are pretty terrible. That's the biggest issue with the format for me at the moment. But it's better than it has been the last couple of seasons, I think. I've not really enjoyed the last 2 Worlds formats that I've been to. But this Worlds format coming up, I think, is a bit more enjoyable, a bit more skill-based, and you can see you see the top cuts of all the events recently, and all the best players are top cutting. So there must be some skill left in the game. So pretty happy with that. As long as there's skill in the game, it's not too much of an issue for me.
No, I tend to agree with you a little bit there. You said, so you played back in the SP era, as you mentioned.
Yes.
You said about how you don't like the supporters nowadays. What's the difference with the supporters, and how has it made the game worse than the SP era?
First of all, almost every draw supporter has a drawback. You're looking at Juniper discarding your hand, and it could help your opponent as much as hurt him. Even Cheron is just 3 cards at the end of the day. That's the drawback in itself. So there's just nothing at the moment. There's nothing to search. There's no strong search supporters at the moment. I mean, Karina's pretty interesting coming out. I think if only that wasn't just a fight in Pokemon, that could have actually been an interesting card. But it's a step in the right direction. Hopefully we'll get some more cards like that, but more general, not just fighting specific.
I agree. Now, you've had a very interesting route to qualification this year. I mentioned on the podcast recently how you managed to tie it up by getting top 16 with TDK at Nationals.
Yeah.
Tell us about your season. Tell us about your qualification. How did you actually get there?
Well, it was pretty touch and go. I mean, I had no intentions of going for the invite to begin with when I first started the season. First of all, both Tommy Roberts and George weren't really playing. There didn't seem to be much competition, and with Tommy not playing, that went my lift for the last like two and a half seasons, and I was like, I don't know how I'm going to be able to get to tournaments. And then Luke, I obviously got in touch with, Luke got in touch with me, I think, and I started going to tournaments with him, and it just gradually turned into a thing where I could actually go to tournaments every weekend. And by about February time, I think, like right towards the end of the city's run, I thought I'm actually going to take this seriously now, because there is a very good chance that if I just top cut a lot of events from there on in, I can qualify. And I think I got my best finish limit from there on for cities. I got 4 cities points from there, and top cut a couple of regionals and top 16 in nationals, and that was my points. Exactly 500.
That's pretty good going. Now, the one thing you do admit, and I do have to ask you this, what decks were you playing at the beginning of the year?
Rubbish ones. I honestly really didn't care. I kind of just wanted to be the guy that broke the format somehow, no matter how I did it. Like, I wasn't going for the wins or anything, so I played some absolutely terrible decks. Some decks that I think should have done better, but I played Victini Terrakion was probably the most meta I played at the early season. Played Genesect Masquerain, which I honestly think was a legitimate deck, but I played against the only 3 Raybors in the room at that cities. Palkia Sigilyph, I played that at regionals, and it was pretty terrible. That was before Muscle Band as well. So it was honestly a pretty mixed bag. I played Seismitoad at cities as well.
That's round, not the new one coming out, which might actually be good.
No, definitely not that one. The round Seismitoad variant. I almost top cut with that, actually.
I do feel your pain. I think there are 2 Premier tournaments all year I didn't play Empoleon or Flareon.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking good Empoleon lists. So, you mentioned before that you've been to Worlds before. This isn't your first rodeo. Is it your third, if I remember correctly?
Yeah, this is my third Worlds now. The last 3 seasons I've qualified. The very first season I would have qualified had I really, A, I understood the format, and B, I was actually in a position to be able to afford it, because I had enough ELO at some point, and then I carried on playing, which most people stopped at that point. But
just a reminder for some people that before championship points we had ELO, the ranking system like in chess, whereby you got to a certain ranking and they literally just cut the top, 50 people in Europe and 40 people in the US.
Yeah.
So it literally got to the point where your ELO got to a good enough point and you would stop playing, because to continue playing you would risk losing your invite, but to stop playing for the rest of the season would guarantee your Worlds invite.
Which was absolutely ridiculous.
Completely silly.
Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted. And so then after that,
so then I had one Worlds. I had a Worlds after that in what was probably the worst format we've ever seen in Pokemon. But I went 3-4 at that, and I had Worlds last year, which I played Kling Klang, and it was just honestly the best meta game call ever, and it just carried me to top cut.
Because both you and Charlie Powell, who will be on in the next couple of weeks, you both played Kling Klang at a time when nobody was playing Kling Klang due to its auto loss to Excelgor.
Gothitelle.
What was the deal with that? Why?
Basically, I was at a friend's house, Rick Cherry, and he just said, you know what, you should play Kling Klang. I had no idea what I was going to play. So yeah, he just gave me his deck and his list. I changed like 4 things. It was a weird list. It ran no Juniper, and it ran. Well, he didn't run those. I personally ran those, and it was amazing. And I took that towards Charlie. Charlie didn't know what he was going to play for Worlds, and I spent the whole time we were there convincing him that Kling Klang was the play, because I was going to play Gothitelle Excelgor actually. I brought that to Japan, built it in Japanese to play against the Japanese players, and they just all started gradually countering it. And I was like, if everyone does this at Worlds, this is going to be impossible to do well with. So I don't think anyone will play Gothitelle for that reason, and I decided to play Klingfang just because it pretty much auto wins almost everything else.
Sounds fantastic. It is a weird kind of metagame thing where you have everyone playing one deck, so then everyone counters it, so then you play a deck which survives without the deck that everyone's countering, and
yeah, it was definitely weird.
Now, I've been asking a lot of people if they've got any plans to slow down in the future or stop playing, but you've actually just started contributing quite often to Luke's blog, Victory Road.
Yep.
Tell us about that. Why are you going with that?
Well, he's just a friend at the end of the day, and I quite like. I'm not a great writer by any means, but I have a lot of ideas. I have a lot of things to write about. So whilst I might not be the best writer in the world, I have interesting stuff to talk about, and it's quite nice getting that out there, and it's always nice helping him out anyway. So,
and
I also think that he can take the blog pretty far as well. So I wouldn't bother if he was lazy and couldn't be asked to do anything. So.
Well, no, similarly, I don't push blogs on the podcast, which I think are rubbish and or will die quite quickly.
Yeah.
And you've obviously got that perspective on the Japanese metagame, which helps quite a bit.
I mean, I have that perspective about once a year, so it's not too often, but it's quite interesting whenever I do get to go out there and see what they're playing, even if it is a totally different format.
Superb. So I suppose the last question is next season going to be like the second half of this season where, you've got a ride with Luke and it's full steam ahead straight back to Worlds next year?
Well, I hope so. I mean, me and Luke are actually planning to move in together, and if we do, then we're not qualifying for Worlds. You know what I mean? There's no excuse not to qualify for Worlds at that rate, because we'll have every deck, we'll be practicing, and because I really didn't play test this that much this year, I just went with Blastoise for the latter half of the season, and it carried me to victories. But I will actually be play testing if we do move in, which hopefully should be happening soon.
And everyone knows having good people to play test with is the secret to doing well.
Exactly, yeah.
I shall see you there. Right, thank you very much for your time as always, and I look forward to speaking to you again in the near future.
Yeah, thank you very much. See you soon.
And once again, a huge thank you to those three gents for helping me out with the interviews. I really do appreciate it. It's always fantastic to get people on. Now, in terms of interviews, and as always, I've said this is possibly going to be a shorter podcast, and I think by now we can just assume that it's never going to happen. It's going to be all right. In terms of interviews, I've already had a couple of international players getting in touch, asking if I want interviews from them, and I reckon that would be quite fun, so let me know if you do. And if you are a Worlds Qualifier listening, and you do want to offer your services, get on the podcast, and you haven't got in touch with me already, please feel free to do so. I don't know if I'm going to be able to include too many Worlds Qualifiers between now and Worlds, but I will certainly make time for as many as I can. UK players, I'm going to get you on if I, as long as we've got time and if I can get in touch with you. International players, I'm going to play it by ear. If you want to hear from seniors, let me know. If you want to hear from international players, let me know, and I will see how many I can get on the podcast for you guys. And I'm going to leave you on this 100th episode with a little story from today. I went to a kind of a conferencey, school trippy kind of thing today, and I met this vaguely official guy who worked for some vaguely official thing, and I ended up chatting to him about Pokemon, because I'm not embarrassed about this. And by that I mean one of my students brought it up in front of me to try and embarrass me, and it's not going to work. I'm proud of this stuff. And I told him about the podcast, and I told him that tonight I would be recording episode 100. I've been doing it for 100 weeks. And he said, what do you talk about? And I told him that it was new sets and results of tournaments and interviews and stuff like that. And he said, oh, how long does each podcast run? About 10, 15 minutes? And an hour and 9 minutes into this podcast, I'm going to let you go with that. Thank you very much for listening. As always, make sure to get in touch. Tweet me at the Wossy, email me, ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk, or just leave a comment below. If you want to hear from seniors or international players, or you've got any comment on anything we've talked about. Thank you very much for listening to this podcast and any of the ones you've listened to in the past, and if you guys keep listening, let's see if we can get 100 more. Thank you very much for listening. My name's Ross, and you've been listening to PTCG Radio.